What you see here is a pair of simultaneous equations. We've already solved this system, but we're going to do this in a little different way now, or in a little more formal way that's going to feed into what we do if we represent the system by an augmented matrix and do what's called a matrix reduction to get the ultimate solution. So in order to keep track of what we're doing, I'm going to use circled numbers to represent the number of an equation. Okay, so circle 1 stands for this equation, circle 2 stands for this equation. Now we're going to have another step where we're going to rewrite these equations, but a little bit differently. You recall that what we did when we solved the system, the first time solving by elimination, we multiplied the first equation by -2 and added it to the second equation. Now we're going to do that, but we're not going to do that all at once. So we're going to do this one step at a time. I'll explain my notations here in a minute, but what I want you to do is just write this down and write down this first row multiplied by -2. That's all. We're not adding it to anything. We're just going to multiply it by -2. Okay, well, hopefully you did that. And multiplying through here by -2, -2 times 2x is -4x. -2 times 3y is -6y. And -2 times -2 is 4. And my second equation, we're just going to write down the second equation this time. Sometimes we'll make changes to both equations, but right now we're just going to write down the second. We're not going to change the second equation. Okay, now my notation over here says that first of all I've got a 1a. Now that's going to stand for the new equation. Instead of calling this 1, we're going to call this 1a, so we don't confuse it with 1. Now once we do this, once we get used to this notation and this process, we're probably going to drop the subscript, the a's and the b's and so forth that we're going to get. But we're saying that now 1a with a circle around it means equation 1a. That's this equation, and it's equal to what? It's equal to -2 multiplied by equation 1. Equation 1 being equation 1 here. Okay, so we've got a new equation now. We'll call it 1a. This is 1a. Now 2a is just equal to 2. Equation 2a is just equal to equation 2. So we've just written down equation 2. Okay. Now in the next step, we do want to add these two equations, but we want to keep writing both equations down in every step. So what we're going to do is we're going to first of all make equation 1b equals equation 1a divided by -4. Equation 2b and here I made a 2b or not 2b joke, but I don't remember it, so I'm not going to repeat it. Equation 2b is going to be what we get when we add these two equations. That's going to mean, and we're going to denote that by saying, well, that's going to equal equation 1a added to equation 2a. Now, can you write down the equations that we get? What we get if we divide equation 1a by -4, and what we get if we add equation 1a to equation 2a. Okay, well, hopefully you've done that. We've already added equation 1a to 2a before. We'd set it up looking a little different than this, but it's easy to do that. -4x and 4x is 0, and I'm going to write the 0 down here. And -6y and -5y is -11y. And 4 and 18 is 22. Now, if you've seen our previous work on simultaneous equations, Okay, we used exactly the same equations, and you've already seen this equation. We didn't bother writing down the 0, but we have a reason for writing it down now that you'll see shortly. Okay, now, what do we get if we divide equation 1a, which is this equation, by negative 4? Well, negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1, so negative 4x divided by negative 4 is just x. Now, negative 6y divided by negative 4 is what? Negative 6 divided by negative 4 is 6/4 or 3/2. So this is 3/2 y. And then 4 divided by negative 4 is negative 1. Now, in the next step, all we're going to do is divide the second equation by negative 11. And of course, you see what's going to happen there. We're going to solve the second equation. And we're going to get, of course, y equals negative 2. That's really straightforward. And again, you've solved that equation. You've seen that. We're going to leave the first equation alone. So how would you notate that? We're going to leave the first equation alone. So we're going to get equation, of course, we're going to call this equation 1c equals what? Leaving the first equation alone. And then equation 2c we're going to get by dividing here by negative 11. How are we going to notate that? And then what is the equation going to be? So see if you can fill this in. See if you can fill this in. Okay, as I said, we leave the first equation alone. That means the first equation is still x plus 3/2 y equals negative 1. And that means that this new equation is the same as it was, so that 1c equals 1b. Hopefully you figured out to write it this way, but if not, you see it now. Now, what's the second equation going to be, and how are we going to notate it if you haven't already done that? Pause and think about that before you watch me do it. Okay, so we're going to have 0. We're going to divide both sides by negative 11, so it's going to be 0. Well, negative 11y divided by negative 11 is just y. And that's going to equal 22 divided by negative 11, which is negative 2. And how do we notate it over here? Well, 2c is going to equal 2b, this equation, divided by negative 11. Now, we're going to solve the first equation, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to subtract 3/2 of the second equation from the first. So the first equation, which we'll call 1d, is going to equal 1c minus 3/2 of equation 2c. Now we're not going to write this down. We're not going to write our calculation down here. We're just going to write the result here. But we probably want a little space to do the calculation. So I'm going to do the calculation over here. You should do the calculation. Write it out on a piece of scrap paper or something. Don't write the calculation here. Just write the result that you get when you do 1c minus 3/2 of 2c. Now, our second equation is going to be unchanged because our second equation is a solution. Our second equation tells us the value of y. So how would you notate that? And what do you get when you do 1c minus 3/2 of 2c? Now all the way over here, I've got 1c. My x plus 3/2 y equals negative 1. That's my 1c. And then I'm going to write down negative 3/2 of 2c right under that. And then I'm going to add the two equations. That'll give me 1c minus 3/2 of 2c. So see if you can do that. Right, the result you get down here, the 1c minus 3/2 of 2c, here where it says to write that down, and then write down your 2d, which is the unchanged equation from before. Okay, now I've gone ahead and written negative 3/2 of 2c. Because 2c is this, negative 3/2 of 0 is 0, negative 3/2 of y is negative 3/2 y, and negative 3/2 of negative 2 is 3. Now I add these two equations to get 1c minus 3/2 of 2c. What you get when you add the equations, write it here, write the second equation from here, here. Okay, just to be sure, x plus 0 is x. 3/2 y and negative 3/2 y add up to 0. And negative 1 and 3 add up to 2. So my 1D equation is going to be x plus 0 equals 2. My 2D equation is just my 2C equation, so we would have noted that. You probably already have because I've asked you to several times. But it's going to be equal to 2C, and we're going to have 0 plus y equals negative 2. And now, what do we see? We have our solution. Because x plus 0, of course, is 2. And 0 plus y is just y, so y equals negative 2. X equals 2, y equals negative 2. Now we can check. And do whatever else we need to do with this solution.